All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dan Powers. I am the head of business development and client management for FullscopeRMS. This is the first in our series of webinars for 2021, so thank you again for joining. We intend to have a terrific lineup for you throughout the year, of webinars, all focused on bringing you expert speakers and discussing important topics and trends within our industry. Before I turn it over to our guest speaker for today, just a couple of logistical items. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will send both the link and the slides from today's event out to all of you afterwards. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and James will be able to respond to those towards the end of today's session. So we're very happy to have James Slotnick spend some time with us today to talk about the early actions of the Biden administration, what we can expect next, and the short and long-term implications for the employee benefits industry. James has been with Sun Life for almost 18 years now in varying roles and has run Sun Life's government relations department since 2017. With that, I'm going to turn it over to James. James?
Great, Dan. Thanks. Thanks very much. Happy to be here. I'm a little nervous. Dan knows this. We've been sitting in the waiting room, whatever, for the last 10 minutes, and both of our cameras have been on. Both of my kids have come in my office, even though I've instructed them not to. And we actually even have a local high school student here that's supposed to be keeping them out. So we'll see what happens. I think it's possible. I know we did a few of these full scope webinars last year. Unfortunately, sometimes my kids come in, I go on mute, I absolutely scream at them, and then they leave the room. So and I just keep going. So if that happens, don't be worried. But getting to the business of today, yeah, it's been an interesting start to the Biden administration. Certainly we are now on our today's day 8, and you can already see there is some that maybe the honeymoon period is over. Certainly the president's address on Inauguration Day was about bipartisanship, moving the country forward. And you're already, again, even just 8 days in, you're already seeing a lot of Republicans not necessarily happy with some of the actions of the president. You're feeling some Democrats feeling that they need to move on their own. So there's a lot of things to consider, certainly for all of our clients out there. There's a lot on the table that the Democrats want to move forward, and some Republicans as well, that will have a dramatic impact on the benefits industry. And that's what today is all about. What to expect from these first 100 days, and really for the first year, what to expect in 2021 that will impact the benefits industry. Dan mentioned this, but we'll save some time at the end for questions. If you have any questions, just put them in that Q&A box there, and I'll try to look at them as we go through the presentation, but I'll definitely take as many as we can at the end. And then, of course, my contact information is at the end, and everyone's, you're more than happy, absolutely can email me with any questions that you have. Before we get into our agenda, a bonus slide here that we're going to go into. It doesn't fit into the Biden administration, but I want to make sure that you are talking to your clients about the changes in the Paycheck Protection Program, because they directly relate to the employee benefit industry. So as you remember, with the PPP came about as part of the CARES Act in March of 2020, targeted businesses with less than 500 employees. Generally speaking, there were some exceptions to that, but generally businesses with less than 500 employees, provided them with 100% forgivable loans, so long as the loans were used to maintain the same number of employees and maintain employees' payrolls. And I understand, there's obviously some little details around loan forgiveness that we're glossing over. But what I want to bring your attention to is, as part of the end of the year package that passed, which was just a massive 5,500 page bill that combined a year spending bill with some COVID relief, there was a second round of the Paycheck Protection Program that was that the government allocated money to. The reason why we care about this, why I'm spending so much time on this, is something that Sun Life, the company I work for, but all the carriers, many carriers out there worked hard on this, was in the original PPP. when the businesses were calculating the value of the loans, they were looking at things like payroll costs, and the definition of payroll costs included the money that employers were paying for employer-sponsored health insurance premiums. So employer premiums for health insurance were included in the value of these loans. What wasn't clear is if you could include the value of employer-paid dental, vision, disability, and life insurance premiums. And so this was something this was kind of a crowning achievement for me last year. Worked on this all year, not just me, a lot of folks in the industry. But in this second round of PPP loans, businesses are now allowed to include the employer portion of group disability, group life, group dental, and group vision premiums. So for your clients out there, that and again, wherever you sit in the in the employee benefit ecosystem, the PPPs reopened really full bore last week. It's critical that we're getting small business owners to understand that the loans they're getting in the second round could actually be bigger than the loans they're getting in the first round, because those employer-paid group life, group disability, dental, and vision premiums are in there. I know Dan has a full scope white paper that talks about this a little bit. We can send that out with the slide deck as well. But again, it's critically important. This is a change that we're trying to talk about as much as possible. I know other insurers are as well, but we want to make sure that business owners realize this. And frankly, part of it is because we want them to be able to continue to pay for their premiums, because the group life, group disability, group dental, and group vision premiums are now specifically included in payroll costs. They're now also forgivable uses of the loans. So it's in everyone's best interest, particularly the employees that are getting these benefits paid for them by their employers, to have the employers include the value of these in their loans and continue to pay for them. By the way, and this will work for any insurer, and for those of you, insurers on the line, the way we're telling our clients to figure out what the calculation is to go on whatever employee or employer portal that you have set up and just look at their bills over the last 12 months and take those employer paid premiums there. So again, sort of a bonus slide, PPP from the last administration. But again, this bill's passed at the end of last year. We're expecting that the PPP, the second round of Paycheck Protection Program loans, will be, continue to have money in there probably through the middle of February. At the Small Business Administration is not, clearly the Biden administration setting everything up with confirmations and things like that. So we haven't seen the level of detail that the Trump administration was providing in terms of how much the value of loans coming out every single day. But again, it's still worthwhile to tell your clients about this wherever you are in the employee benefit ecosystem, because it will help make sure that employees continue to get those employer paid coverages. So again, bonus slide on PPP, but now we're going to move into turn the page a little bit on the Trump administration and look into the Biden administration. So we're going to talk about three things this afternoon. First, we're going to start with some first 100-day realities, and it's been challenging, I think, regardless of whether you watch Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, whatever side of the aisle you're on. The expectations of change that the Biden administration will be able to make, I think, is being slightly overblown by both the left and the right. And so we'll get into why we think that is. Then we'll look at some of the priorities, and based on what we talk about in the first 100-day realities, we'll go through what's possible, what's not, and we'll spend some time specifically looking at the American Rescue Plan, which is President Biden's plan that Congress is talking about right now. There's a number of employee benefit issues in there. Probably the ones that are of most interest to us, which we'll spend the most time on, are COBRA subsidies, which, if you've heard me speak before, it feels like we're always talking about COBRA subsidies, but they're closer than they've ever been. And also an expansion of paid emergency, paid sick leave, and paid medical leave. So we'll spend some time there. And then finally, I know I just looked before we got on the call, 655 days until the 2022 midterms. That said, it is already, something that people in D.C. are laser focused on. You may have seen just literally moments ago, Leader McCarthy is down in Mar-a-Lago with President Trump. They released a picture and a joint state, or the office of President Trump released a statement saying that he's come to an agreement with Leader McCarthy that he will work to help Republicans regain the majority in the House in 2022. So I know it seems like 2022 is far away, but particularly when we talk about the majorities that the Democrats have in the House and the Senate, there is no majority. It's 50-50, and just a 10-seat majority in the House. Some of the way members are going to vote and some of the activity that you'll see from leadership is directly driven by, one, Democrats being concerned that they could lose those majorities in 2022. And it's a balancing act of, if we're going to lose those majorities in 2022, what are we willing to push through in 2021 and into 2022? Or the Democrats want to play a little bit safer, maybe don't go as aggressively as they could to potentially hold on to those 2022 majorities. So a lot we're going to cover in the next, what do we got here? Next, 40 minutes or so. But, as Dan mentioned, or as we both mentioned, we'll do questions at the end. You're welcome to the slides, and we'll send out that PPP white paper as well. So first thing, I think, just to level set here, there's really three ways that the Biden administration can affect change, can make change, and some are more quick, some can happen more quickly than others, and certainly we're seeing the Biden administration, arguably more aggressively than any other administration in history, take advantage of executive orders and executive actions. I saw a chart this morning that said that President Biden has signed 17 executive orders. In 8 days into his presidency, that is by far the record. President Trump at this point had signed, I believe it was 6. President Obama, something like 3. President Bush, 2. I don't even think President Clinton had signed an executive order at this point in his administration. There's nothing wrong with executive orders. Certainly President Obama expanded the use of them. President Trump certainly signed a significant number as well. Why the executive branch likes those is there's no legislative oversight. Executive orders, come from the president. And what we've seen President Biden use executive orders the most on is to cancel out President Trump's previous executive orders. And again, that happens in every administration, but the Biden administration certainly has been, and I don't mean this in a negative way, it's just a fact, very aggressive in moving forward on executive action. But again, the reason for that is the quickest and most effective way for them to make changes, but really they're insulated into what changes they can make to really canceling out or making tweaks to executive actions that President Trump had taken. The next thing that we're going to start to see, and this will be over the next 6 months or so, and your clients will start to see this too, is as President Biden's cabinet is sworn in, as those cabinet secretaries go into place, you're going to see the offices, or excuse me, the departments look at the administrative rules that the Trump administration had put out. So a good example of a rule that the Trump administration put out that the Biden administration wants to look at, and I'm not an expert on this rule, but the Department of Labor in the Trump administration put out a rule that essentially changed the way overtime was calculated. And again, that's not my area of expertise, but the Biden administration has said when Secretary Walsh, Marty Walsh from Boston, when Mayor Walsh is confirmed, that's one of the things they want him to look at right away, some of these overtime rules. The challenge with the administrative rulemaking process, though, is unlike executive orders, which the president can just sign, when an agency puts forward a rule, generally speaking, there's a comment period. The agency then needs time to review the comments. Sometimes there's a second comment period. So it can be a 90, 100-day, 180-day process to put forward a new rule. So while the Biden administration would like to maybe take apart some of the Trump administration error rules, it's going to be difficult to do that in the short term. That's probably middle to late 2021 before we start to see any of those rules change to reverse. Another one that may be more close to home for some of us is the Association Health Plan rule, which the Department of Labor and HHS put forward in Treasury under the Trump administration. President Biden's staff's already signaled, they'd like to relook at that Association Health Plan rule. But again, that's probably a mid-2021, late 2021 action, because just the time it takes to make changes there. And then finally, on the legislative front, I think we're already starting to see, as I mentioned in the opening, 8 days into the administration, there's not clear bipartisan support for a massive additional COVID relief piece of legislation. And this is what's really going to be difficult for the Biden administration is unless you have 10 Republicans that are willing to work with you, it's going to be a very narrow set of things that you can pass through that budget reconciliation process, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But budget reconciliation, you only need 50 votes to move legislation there. Generally, you need 60 votes in the Senate because you have to close debate on something with 60 votes. But things that directly relate to federal revenues can go through budget reconciliation. But even that definition is squishy. And so again, we'll talk more about this, but it's a very narrow set of things that can use budget reconciliation. So it's going to be very hard for the president to move legislation through. And for those of you that feel like I'm being maybe too negative on the Biden administration, I would just ask you to go back in time. So today is, the 28th or 29th? Go back to January 28th of 2017. If we were doing this webinar on that day, we'd be saying, President Trump has just been sworn in. He has a Republican-controlled Senate and a Republican-controlled House with very slim majorities, which essentially President Trump had larger majorities than President Biden has. And if you think back to 2017, what were the Republicans able to accomplish, from a major legislative standpoint? They were not able to repeal and replace the ACA, even though they had the votes. They had 52 votes in the Senate to be able to use budget reconciliation. They weren't able to corral enough Republicans to get those 50 votes. But at the end of 2017, they were able to use budget reconciliation to pass tax reform. And so I think, it's just important to remember the near past there, where President Trump had a better setup than President Biden does in terms of a legislative majorities, and he found it very difficult to move legislation in that first year. So again, that's not criticizing either administration. It's just when those majorities are that thin, it's difficult to move things forward. The other thing that is challenging for the Biden administration at the moment is they have many competing priorities. So on the one hand, they want to get as many cabinet secretaries through as they can. And, certainly that's what they're doing. They continue to check them off. There's now 4 or 5 that are confirmed. There's going to be another vote on Monday. Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Buttigieg will be, he's already been through the committee process. As I mentioned, Mayor Walsh will start to, go through the committee process in the next few weeks. So they're really trying to move on these cabinet secretaries as quickly as they can. A major challenge for the Democrats, and we're certainly, well, before I get into that, the benefit of 50 votes in the Senate is you only need 50 votes to confirm a cabinet secretary, with Vice President Harris being the tiebreaker. So Democrats are going to be able to confirm everyone that, as long as they stick together, everyone that President Biden wants to be on the cabinet. And it's actually interesting to see, you've seen pretty significant support for, at least through this point, a majority of President Biden's cabinet nominees, where you're seeing 20 to 30 to 40 Republicans joining on these votes. That is different, frankly, than how Democrats were voting for some of President Trump's cabinet secretaries. And there's different reasons for that, but it's nice to see that Republicans are helping move some of these cabinet appointments through. Although maybe it'll get more difficult as time moves forward. The big issue for Democrats, and again, we're not going to spend any time on this, the substance of it is impeachment. Impeachment takes up floor time, and floor time, particularly in the Senate, is everything. I mean, you could argue it is in the House too, but because of the procedural nature of the Senate, floor time's everything. And I believe on February, it's either the 2nd or the 8th. I should have checked before. Impeachment is going to start in early February, better way to say it. And once impeachment starts, yes, it's possible to legislate and do do the impeachment trial at the same time, but it's very difficult to. The bifurcation of time, you've probably heard that term. Yes, it's possible to bifurcate time in the Senate, but it's very difficult during an impeachment trial. The first impeachment of President Trump took out about 20 days of floor time. The impeachment of President Clinton impeachment trial took up about 80 days of floor time. I mean, that's a significant amount. And if Democrats are looking to call witnesses in this trial, Republicans are going to be looking to call witnesses as well. And that's just going to take more time as well. So, whatever you think of impeachment, good, bad, or indifferent, it takes up a significant amount of floor time. And that could take up maybe all of February. Depending on how that would drag out. And then on top of that, you have Democrats wanting to move forward on the American Rescue Plan, which we're going to spend some time on in a moment. enrollment. So again, the floor time is the issue here. We want to get the cabinet members, if you're leader Schumer, you're saying we want to get the cabinet members confirmed. We want to move the impeachment trial of the president forward. We also want to make sure we have time to move this American Rescue Plan on the floor as well. And then hanging over all of this is President Trump during President Trump's tenure, Leader McConnell was an absolute master at moving judges through the confirmation process. And you could be happy or sad about that, but 25% of all federal judges right now across the board were confirmed by our President Trump's appointments. So the Biden administration wants to follow that blueprint and constantly put judges up for confirmations, and with the 50 votes, the Democrats will be able to do that. But again, that takes floor time. So there's a lot of competing interests for the Democrats, particularly in the first 100 days, that they all want to get started fast, but you can't do everything at the same time, and you especially can't do everything at the same time when you really just want to work Monday afternoon until Thursday and then be able to fly home for the weekend, which, right or wrong, is generally the schedule in the Senate. So again, that's sort of, the backdrop of where things go. The nice thing about the Biden administration's priorities is before they came into office, a few days before Inauguration Day, they released the American Rescue Plan. And this is, I can forward this to Dan if you haven't, had a chance to read the PDF. It's a policy paper. It's a 17-page document that goes through, it's not legislative language or anything like that. It's written in plain language. It's easy to understand. And it really lays out what they'd like to see in this COVID relief package. Now, the challenge, I use that word a lot. I got maybe the opportunity for Democrats is, and clearly, if you are following this on whatever networks you are, is do the Democrats want to move forward on their own, or do they want to try to move forward with Republicans? And so remember, budget reconciliation, it's something you can use once a fiscal year to move legislation through the Senate that has a direct relation to federal spending, and you only need 50 votes for it to pass. The reason you only need 50 votes is because there's no time limit on debate. It automatically ends. There's basically 1 day allocated to debate, and after 24 hours, debate automatically ends. I've separated the items in the American Rescue Plan. The ones on the left appear eligible for budget reconciliation. The items on the right do not appear eligible for budget reconciliation. Budget reconciliation is more of an art than science. There's an American Council of Life Insurers, an ACLI call today. Maybe some of you were on it, where a number of lobbyists, myself included, we were trying to debate we were trying to talk through certain items that we think could apply to reconciliation, what couldn't. But this, I feel pretty confident that, that these are items that could or couldn't. So on the left-hand side, I won't go through the things that don't apply to us, but you can see there's a significant amount of aid. Schools, state and locals in there. Remember, that was a big issue for Democrats last year, funding for state and local governments, additional money for vaccine and testing. All that involves government spending, and generally speaking, government spending can go through reconciliation. Those $1,400 stimulus checks, those would be able to go through budget reconciliation. Again, a direct impact on federal spending. Increasing child care tax credit, that's really to help daycare centers and child care centers that have been very significantly harmed. There's also other money in there for child care centers, but increase the amount of money parents would get back for sending their kids to child care, double the child tax credit. All those directly related to federal spending really seem like they could go through budget reconciliation. From an employment standpoint, again, this is where it starts to hit us, all of us on the call. The additional unemployment assistance expires in March. So remember, in the CARES Act, way back when in March of 2020, which seems like 500 years ago, people who knew me before, I was clean cut, unbelievable, and I have this terrible beard, looked like a disaster. But in March of 2020, when the CARES Act was passed, there was that $600 federal unemployment subsidy. So you got your normal unemployment, then you got that $600 on top of that. That ended in August. Later in the year, there was an additional $300 that was added to that, and then as part of the that stimulus package that was passed at the end of 2020, there's a $300 COVID unemployment subsidy on top of your state unemployment that ends in March. Democrats would like to see an additional $400, so a new $400 additional unemployment benefit be tacked on starting in March. That again directly relates to federal spending. I did a call yesterday with a with a consultant group in the Midwest, and we had some small business owners on the call. And it's funny. There's from a benefits standpoint, I was interested in that some business owners were saying, they feel like the enhanced unemployment is impacting some of their employees come back to work. Others said it's not. But so it's something that we certainly we're watching closely. COBRA subsidies. I feel like a broken record. I've been talking about COBRA subsidies since March of last year. President Biden has a COBRA subsidy in this plan. It doesn't say the percentage of the subsidy, but it would go through September of 2021. It doesn't say the start date, but you have to presume that it would be retroactive to 1/1/21. That could be significant. You think of stop loss businesses out there. We just at Sun Life, we are supportive of a COBRA subsidy. One, we think, for individuals that have been laid off, we think, it's important that they can continue their health care. From a business standpoint, COBRA subsidies would keep people on the employer-sponsored coverage and is, generally good then for the stop loss business. Plus, generally people who would elect COBRA, and I'm generalizing, maybe they're electing it because they have pre-existing conditions or things like that where they maybe there's some anti-selection there. With the COBRA subsidy, since everyone is getting heavily subsidized COBRA, some of that anti-selection risk goes away. What would the subsidy be? Hard to say. When the Democrats passed the HEROES Act in the summer, in the House, didn't pass the Senate, but they had 100% COBRA subsidy. Anywhere from an 85 to 100% COBRA subsidy has been floated, and it's significant that the president has put it in his plan, and so it's something we're watching closely. At Sun Life, we're supportive of it, as I mentioned. I know a lot of the health insurers are. My counterparts at health insurers and other stop loss carriers are as well. So we'd like to see that, but something we'll be watching closely. And then just to close out the healthcare part of things, the Biden administration would like to increase ACA subsidies for those that are on the exchanges. You may have seen, was it yesterday or today? There was an executive action that's directing HHS to reopen the exchanges for another special enrollment period for those that have lost their coverage because they've been laid off. Again, that directly, the subsidies directly deals with federal spending. So it feels like everything on the left could go through budget reconciliation. So and you may have seen, I'm blanking on the press secretary's name, I apologize. But the Biden administration has been clear that they would like this to be a bipartisan package. And so now Democratic leaders are starting to say, well, some Republicans aren't so sure. Everything on the left, Democrats can push through themselves as long as they're able to get Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin to agree. As long as all 50 Democrats agree, they can use budget reconciliation for everything on the left. The Biden administration has said the reason they want to go bipartisan is because they want the things on the right as well. And frankly, the things on the right can't use budget reconciliation, at least in my opinion. Increasing the minimum wage to $15. The federal government could put forward, and I believe this might even be in place, you could say that if you're a federal contractor, you have to offer a $15 wage. Why? Well, that directly impacts federal spending if the federal government's paying out money to that contractor. Maybe you could argue there's some ancillary there, but at least has a direct impact on federal spending. It's hard to say that by telling private businesses they have to pay $15 an hour, that directly impacts federal revenue. There's an argument to be made. Yes, that does have an impact on tax revenue. And you may have seen Senator Sanders is arguing that increasing the minimum wage could use budget reconciliation, but I think that, realistically is something that won't be able to. So you would need 10 Republicans to support that. Extending eviction and foreclosure moratorium. The president has put out an executive order, asking Department of the relevant departments to look into that. But again, for the federal government to do that doesn't have a direct impact on federal spending, so probably not in budget reconciliation. Now, again, something that I'm watching very closely and we should all be watching is the emergency paid family and medical leave, which we'll dive into for a moment. In a moment, it doesn't appear that could go through budget reconciliation either. So what we're going to talk about is probably broader than what could go through, but gives us a good sense of what Democrats are thinking just around the whole topic of paid family and medical leave, which now that the PPP is done, I'm back to full-time paid family, not full-time, but most of my time is spent on paid family and medical leave. This is a significant proposal that the Biden administration has put out. It is by far the most sweeping proposal that we've ever seen on the federal level with serious backing. The big changes would be, think back to last year when there was the remember the FFCRA? We all love that. The Families First Coronavirus Relief Act. It created that 12-week, 2 weeks of paid emergency paid sick leave, 10 weeks of emergency paid FMLA. This proposal would take that FFCRA and basically, it's that on steroids. It would provide 14 weeks of leave. The leave would be paid at up to $1,400 per week. That's a significant departure from what the FFCRA leaves are, which are capped at something like $250 and $500 per day, per week, depending on the leave. I don't have the exact amount there, but you folks know what I'm talking about. The other thing is the reason for leave for those 14 weeks is significantly expanded. Remember, under the FFCRA, you had 2 weeks where if you were sick or you were caring for someone, you got those 2 weeks paid. But the other 10 weeks were really just in case your kid's school was closed and you weren't able to work. This would provide 14 weeks of leave for you have COVID-19, you're caring for someone with COVID-19, you need to get the vaccine, time off to get the vaccine, or your kid's school is closed due to COVID-19. So that's a significant expansion. And maybe what's telling the most is that the bottom two bullets there, this would apply to all employers, regardless of size. So that's a departure in two different ways from what the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act leave was. Remember, that leave generally only applied to businesses that were under 500 employees. And if you were under 50 employees, you could essentially self-exempt yourself from having to provide the leave. There was really, it was a very, very liberal ability for companies to decide that they weren't going to provide that leave if they were under 50 employees. They basically just had to decide that they couldn't do it. This would say that if you're under 500 employees, remember FFCRA, if you took the leave, your employer was provided a 100% tax credit from the federal government to pay for that leave. This proposal would mirror that. It would say if you're under 500 employees and your employee has to go off on this leave here, 100% of that leave, 100% of that $1,400 a week is going to be, the government's going to pay for that with a 100% tax credit. However, and this was not part of FFCRA, now over 500 would have to provide this leave as well, and there are no tax credits for businesses over 500 employees. So just think of the companies you work for. If any of you work for an employer that has more than 500 employees, you may have a great paid family and medical leave program, you might have a great PTO program, but your employer did not have to provide the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act paid leave. They just didn't have to. They were exempted. This is saying now every employer in the country, every employee in the country gets 14 weeks for COVID-related items, 100% pay up to $1,400 a week. I should have said that. The rationale for that in the Biden plan is that covers individuals up to, I don't have this number up, it's something like $78,000 a year would get 100% income replacement. So it'll be 100% income replacement up to $1,400 per week for those 14 weeks. So again, this is a big deal. Now why it's not eligible for budget reconciliation, and for any of you that are on the ACLI call, you've already heard this debate, is for you, the over 500 employee expansion, it's kind of a mandate. It's saying, hey, you have to provide paid leave to, if you're a business with over 500 employees, you have to provide paid leave going forward. That does not have a direct impact on federal revenue. And since that doesn't have a direct impact on federal revenue, that cannot use budget reconciliation. So you need 60 senators to do the 500 employer paid leave. The U500, if you're given that tax credit, it feels like if Congress wanted to say, hey, we're going to take that FFCRA leave, we're going to expand it, and we're going to apply it to just U500 businesses, they could use budget reconciliation because that tax credit directly impacts federal spending. Now, again, reconciliation is crazy, and you might say, how would that work? How wouldn't it work? Just think back to 2009, 2010. The Affordable Care Act passes in the Senate because it uses budget reconciliation. So again, you can fit a lot of stuff under budget reconciliation if you're, if you can maneuver it properly. And so it would appear that this proposal on the screen for U500 employees could go through budget reconciliation since the tax credit would be there. But again, we're watching this closely. It does not at this point have any Republican support. And again, we haven't seen the legislative language or anything like that. But remember, the FFCRA leaves in 2021, employers that are under 500 employees, they can provide that FFCRA leave. They can continue to if they want to. The requirements ended. The tax credits are still there. And there's going to be pressure. That ends in March. There's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on Democrats to continue with something through March. I can tell you when, in the early drafts of the that end of the year bill, there was no paid leave whatsoever. And certain Democratic offices, Senator Murray from Washington, Senator Gillibrand from New York, in particular, talking to their staffs, they were furious, very unhappy. And the compromise they were able to get was this: we'll lose the mandate, but the tax credit will remain. Now that Democrats have the majority, and Senator Murray will be the chairwoman of the Senate Health Committee, Health, Education, Labor and Pension Committee. Paid leave is critical for her. So, as an industry, the reason why we spend so much time on this is we all have to grapple with this for two reasons. One, let's say something like this went through. Many of us in the absence management space, we had to all of a sudden make it so that we could administer the FFCRA leaves, and those came out of nowhere. Obviously no one was prepared for COVID, so it has significant impact, for those that are providing absence management services. And if something like this went through, where there was a requirement on businesses over 500 employees, as you know better than me, businesses with over 500 employees are much more likely to outsource their absence management, than smaller businesses. There is going to be a call to all of us to say, hey, you need to administer this new type of leave, which has literally come out of thin air. So again, we're watching this closely. It's unclear. I can't give you any percentages. It's unclear what would happen. I think the most likely outcome in the near term, in the next 6 months, is that the U500 space sees something, but not the 500 and above, which again, similar to the FFCRA leaves, maybe with those extended purposes there. So then it goes to, okay, so that this package that we just talked about, the American Rescue Plan, this is going to take up the first half of the year. Again, impeachment's February, and I think this House and Senate are going to try to pass a budget over the next couple of weeks, which you need a shell of a budget, which you need to do for reconciliation. There's all these procedural things, which again takes up floor time. But March, April, that's when this is really getting hammered out. That first package. Then we're getting into the second half, getting towards the second half of the year. That's when maybe we see the second package that President Biden would put forward. And maybe there we see some of the broader reforms. One thing that, we didn't talk about, so far is, government expansion into the healthcare space. It does appear that budget reconciliation could be used to lower the Medicare eligibility age to 60. Again, because it has a direct impact on federal spending. That would be something that certainly the Biden administration, President Biden's talked quite a bit about that in the campaign trail. We've looked at that from a stop loss perspective, and if you just think of your own companies, there are people that are at your company that are between the ages of 60 and 65. Now, if they all of a sudden found out they were eligible for Medicare at 62, say they're 62, they're not necessarily going to drop their employer plan to go into Medicare. It's another option, but more likely their employer-based coverage is better. So, when our actuaries have looked at that, we don't think it has a material impact on the stop loss business, but certainly, any time the government's getting closer or more involved in the healthcare space is, something we're watching closely. On tax reform, I can only speak, this putting on, I know Sun Life is concerned about corporate tax reform. I think all insurers are, for those either ACLI member companies or work with the American Council of Life Insurers or really any industry trade. You'll know this is, the president's talked quite a bit on the campaign trail of increasing the corporate tax rate to 28%. There's a lot of spending that's involved in the things that we've talked about here. Corporate tax increases, unfortunately, are a potential pay for some of these. We also are, are not concerned, but I think we are aware that it's likely that you will see increased taxes on individuals that make more than $400,000 a year. And both of those definitely hinge on how the economy performs this year. The thing with this year, 2021, is that budget reconciliation can be used once a fiscal year, and the fiscal year runs through October. So in fiscal year 2021, which ends in October, that budget reconciliation can be used for that first package that we talked about. But then when we get to October, November, or November, December, it's fiscal year 2022, but it's still calendar year 2021. So it's possible the budget reconciliation could be used twice in the calendar year 2021. That's the road, by the way, that the Trump administration went. They tried to use budget reconciliation once for the ACA repeal and replace, and they used reconciliation in the second part of the fiscal year, or the next fiscal year, same calendar year, for tax reform. So, again, this is sort of, we're getting towards the end of the year here. If the economy is recovering and Democrats feel like it is not going to harm them too much going into the 2022 election, or maybe it could help them going into the 2022 midterms, corporate tax reform, individual tax reform, certainly on the table. Again, budget reconciliation could be used there. And then, what happens with paid leave? So not the emergency paid leave, but, clearly people that are getting put into the Biden administration are national paid family and medical leave friendly, or more so, whether that be in the Domestic Policy Council or other different parts of the Biden administration. The Democrats, at least I can tell you, Democratic staff that have been supportive of national paid family and medical leave feel great about the outlook over the next 2 years. Now, it's tough. We've talked about the Family Act before. That's the proposal that would create a 12-week national program run through the Social Security Administration for what would provide 66% income replacement, 50 basis points, payroll tax, 50-50, employer and employee. That's not a great model for insurers, just to be transparent. What we have advocated for, the industry has spun our wheels a little bit. As you folks know, there's now 9 states in DC that have state paid family medical leave programs, with Colorado's being the most recent that passed on election day in a ballot initiative. In 7 of those, in 7 of the 9 states, we'll leave the DC program out of it for a moment. 7 of the 9 states give employers 2 options. They can either go into the public program, or they can create a private plan. So they can work with an insurer, they can self-fund, and we can administer those plans. We continue, and I say we, I mean the industry. Lobbyists from all of our competitors, maybe lobbyists from your companies. We continue to talk to Democrats about different models. So there's that Family Act model, but there's a lot of cost involved with creating a new agency within Social Security. And Social Security, I mean, I don't have to tell you folks, the expertise to turn around stuff quickly, that's not their expertise. We have really tried, the industry had to approach more progressive members of Congress and tell the story of how insurers are actually good. You'd be surprised that maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but we don't have the best reputation on the Hill. And talking about all the return to work services, all the vocational rehab, just everything that we help, how quickly we turn around claims. We've started to be able to tell that story, and I think members of Congress, particularly on the more progressive side of things, are starting. We got work to do to trust us a little bit more and realize we have expertise. And the Family Act would be expensive, and it would really crowd us out and throw away that expertise. And obviously, it would have substantial impacts to the short-term disability business for everyone if the Family Act went through. The American Rescue Plan, that model that we just talked about, the FFCRA model, where basically it's a mandate. You as the employer, you have to provide the paid leave. That's sort of like a New York type, not exactly, but a style where the employer has to figure out how to provide it. Whether it be on a ASO or a fully insured basis, that's something where insurers, that might not be the worst thing for the insurance industry if there was some type of mandate that employers provide paid family and medical leave. I'm not saying these are all, the best outcomes for the industry, but I think, we've talked about this last year, and I think, it's becoming more and more apparent. The industry has to be prepared. The paid family medical leave, it's not going away. And we need to provide solutions to members of Congress rather than saying, hey, well, we sell short-term disability, and that's pretty good. That's not enough. 40% of Americans have short-term disability. I've used that stat a million times, and the first thing I get back from many congressional staffers is, well, that's great, but 60% of America doesn't have short-term disability then. So obviously the private market isn't hitting everything. And obviously there's ways to rebut that as well. But I think we're in a better place now as an industry than we were. But again, I think as your companies or wherever you are in the ecosystem, whether you're advising clients or your company's trying to think up new products or services, paid family medical leave has to be at the top, because it's just something that's not going away. And it feels, whether it's through the emergency paid leave that it's very targeted or maybe more comprehensive, it's something that we're just all going to have to deal with. And again, I think the industry, we're trying to frame it in a way that we are part of the solution. We're supportive of more Americans getting paid family medical leave. We just want to be at the table. And I think the industry and all the carriers out there have done a good job of setting the table so that we could be there. So last thing we'll do, and then we'll open things up for questions. Feel free to type those questions in if you have any. We'll just look at the midterms briefly. This is a terrifying slide to the Democrats, and one that both Democratic and Republican strategists are very well aware of. In your first midterm, it's usually not good for your party, particularly when your party has complete control of the House. If you have a trifecta, if you control the House, the Senate, and the Oval Office, you're going to lose seats, is what history tells us. President Trump, his party controls the House, the Senate, the Oval Office. He loses 41 House seats. And now the Senate, they gained 2 Senate seats, which may seem good, but if you remember the map in 2018, it was a very favorable map for Republicans. So the fact that they only picked up 2 was actually was much lower than what many thought they could have. President Obama, just a disastrous midterm, loses 6 Democratic House or Democratic Senate seats, 63 House seats. Really some of the outliers here. You see President Bush, but you think about that. That's the first midterm after 9/11. But again, and especially particularly on the House side, you're preparing to take some losses. Now, if you're the Democrats, if you're Speaker Pelosi, you're thinking right now she has a 10-seat majority in the House. It is the smallest House majority since I think 1932 or something like that. It's it's a historically small majority, and Republicans picked up 12 House seats in the 2020 election. So you have President Biden winning the election, but you have Republicans picking up House seats. Now, that's not to say that that's never happened before, but that's not a good sign for Democrats going into the midterms if they're already losing seats in a year where their top candidate is on the ticket and they're losing seats. So Democrats are concerned. Again, the Senate, 1 seat is all they need. Certainly the sweep in Georgia was huge for the Democrats. I mean, that goes without saying. But this is what Democrats are worried about. If they try to go too progressive, or if they try to go too partisan, they're going to upset independent voters, and it is going to mean that some of their members that are in swing districts, whether it's in the House or the Senate, they are going to have really, really tough races in 2022. I can tell you the NRCC, the National Republican Congressional Committee, that's the fundraising arm for Republicans on the House side of things. The chairman of that committee is Tom Emmer, or Congressman Emmer from Minnesota. They are very bullish on their chances of picking up the House. On the flip side, Democrats, the DCCC, they are concerned, and certainly, both sides are already trying to ramp up fundraising as much as they can because they know how important this is going to be. So again, you might say you might see some things over the next year and a half and say, I don't understand. They have the majority. They could push this through. Everybody's looking to 2022, and particularly when you look at the Senate, there's some tough places for both parties. So on the left-hand side, because both Senator Kelly and Senator Warnock are coming into seats where there had been either a retirement or death. Senator McCain obviously passing away for Senator Kelly's seat, and Senator Isaacson retiring, and then Senator Loeffler was appointed. But both of those seats are up again in 2022, is what I'm trying to say. So, think about those tough races in Georgia. Senator Warnock's up again, tough race in Arizona, both purple states, trending, blue, you could argue, given the results of the presidential election. But, tough races. New Hampshire, very tough race. Senator Hassan, you may remember this, in 2016 in her race. She won her race in New Hampshire by 1,000 votes, defeating then Senator Ayotte. Now, this is a blueprint, unfortunately, that Senator Hassan's concerned about. She was the governor of New Hampshire, ran against an incumbent senator, and was able to win. She's likely to be challenged by Governor Sununu, the current governor of New Hampshire. Is likely there. And again, Nevada, Nevada, I think is how they like you to say it. Again, a very close presidential state. You have Senator Cortez Masto. Now, on the Republican side, what's interesting is you have those 3 battleground states that are going to have open seats. You have North Carolina, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Senator Portman, announcing his retirement this week. So open seats are always battles. You could also see potentially 1 or 2 more. Some people are saying someone like a Senator Johnson hasn't fully committed yet. Wisconsin, another tough race. Senator Grassley's getting up there in age. Sharp as a whip, no question about it. But he's in his 80s as well. And then Florida, swing state. There, Senator Rubio is privately, and maybe not even privately. That's not fair because I haven't heard him say it. But I think there is some. There's talk of potentially Ivanka Trump challenging him on the right, primarying him there, which that could be interesting. So again, you only need 1 seat to move for this to change. So again, I know I spent a lot of time on the midterms, which again is 655 days away. But the reason is that some of the actions that we're seeing today are because of those charts. Democrats are concerned about potentially losing seats in the House and the Senate. The majorities are so thin. How do they protect members in swing districts? Or is the strategy for Democrats, we're probably going to lose the majority in 2022. That's what history would tell us. So we might as well try to push through as much as we can in the next 2 years. And you'll notice one thing I didn't talk about at all in this presentation is the filibuster, because Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin have, or particularly Senator Sinema, have given Leader McConnell, assurances that, they will not change the filibuster rules. And there's other Democrats that are on that too. So budget reconciliation is one option for Democrats. That's, probably no Republican support, or try to find things where you have Republican unity. And again, the 2022 midterms, it seems crazy that we're talking about it. That hangs over a lot of the decisions that are being made. So I know we jammed a lot into a short period of time, but I think the Biden administration is figuring out what every administration figures out. Campaigning is awesome. It's easy. I mean, it's not easy, but it's fun. You get to run around. You tell them what you're going to do. Governing is difficult, and it's extremely difficult when you only have when it's a Senate that's tied. Even though you have the majority, you don't have that 60-seat majority, and when you have such a small margin of error in the House with only 10 seats. So governing difficult, campaigning easy. I think Biden administration's figuring that out. The Democrats can move things. It's really up to leadership to say, do we want to use the budget reconciliation process where we can? And if we can keep if you're leadership, you're saying, if we can keep all the Democrats united, if you can keep the Joe Manchins and the Senator Manchins and Senator Sanders on the same page, if you can keep the Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez on the same page with maybe more blue dog Democrats in the House, if you can keep everybody united, you can pass things through budget reconciliation. You might have heard there's this new gang of 16 in or they're calling themselves the Sweet 16 in the Senate, 8 Democrats, 8 Republicans. They're trying to come up with more bipartisan ideas. But will Democrats wait for bipartisanship, or will they go, push more for budget reconciliation type things? And again, we talked about the midterms forever, but they're only 655 days away. You'll certainly be hearing me talk about those, again in the future. So there are a couple questions that came in, which I'll take. I just want to go to this last slide here. We'll send out the deck, but if you don't feel like asking a question here, you feel like send me a note. My email information is there. My phone number is there too, I guess, if you want to call, because I didn't think that through. But don't abuse the number. But certainly you can contact me if you're looking for that. So in the Q&A, one question, which it's a great one, just around how the administration. The question is, do you think how the administration handles the pandemic in the near term is going to have an impact on the 2022 races? And the answer is yeah, absolutely. Again, when you look at these numbers here, President Trump loses 41 seats. Why does he lose 41 seats? Now, it's hard to say, but maybe people didn't like the ACA repeal and replace strategy, and maybe tax reform was something that Democrats were able to run on. When you go back to President Obama loses those 63 seats for one reason that everyone on this call knows: the Affordable Care Act. 100% Republicans ran very hard against, government taking more control of healthcare, and that's what impacted there. I think what you're going to see from the Republican side of things is, yes, if the pandemic is not handled well, they're gonna run on that. I think the Biden administration has already started to walk this back a little bit. I think it was a mistake to say that there was no plan for the vaccine rollout when and I'm not defending the Trump administration here. I'm just saying, when basically 3 days into his administration, there was 1 million vaccines a day that were going out. Now, I think it's telling that you've now seen the Biden administration say we're going to get 300 vaccinations done by the end of the summer was the new number. Now that's a significant increase from what the Trump administration had been trying to do. And yes, I think that is certainly how COVID-19 moves forward is going to have a huge impact. There certainly is things that candidates are going to run on, but that will certainly be it. And again, just sort of I'll close with this and turn it over to Dan to say a few words. I think it's significant that the meeting with Leader McCarthy and former President Trump today is significant for a number of reasons. One, Leader McCarthy on the floor of the House, although he did not vote to impeach the president, has had some pretty harsh words, particularly closer to January 6th for the president and his involvement there. And there was a lot of and this is what Leader McCarthy had said. There was a lot of friction between those two. And for them to come out today with that, again, the photo op and the announcement saying, hey, they're going to be united to try to, take back the House in 2022 means, we're probably going to see former President Trump emerge from sort of the silence he's had, since leaving office. And that is certainly going to have an impact on the midterms as well. But again, key takeaways, I think, from an industry perspective, we're well positioned. The companies out there, we have good relationships. There's a lot coming at us. And again, the number one thing you should be watching is what happens with paid family medical leave, because that, clearly will have the biggest impact on us. So with that, Dan, I'll turn it over to you to close things up.
Great. Thanks, James. And it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So thank you everybody again for joining. Like I said at the beginning, we will be sending out the recording link and also the slides to this presentation to everybody that we invited. And, stay tuned for future events. Like I said at the top, we intend to host a lot more of these throughout the year, and we'll continue to bring expert speakers like James to these webinars so that you can, stay on top of some of the industry topics and trends that are most important to all of us in our business. So thank you again and have a great night.